Hi everybody, and welcome back to the College Admissions Snapshot Case Study number 2. You may remember case study number 1, where we looked at Erin, the soccer player who really wanted to go to Princeton. And after assessing her body of work, I determined, in my opinion, that I thought that Erin was going to get into Princeton. Now today, in our case study number 2, we're going to look at Pretty Good Pete. Pretty Good Pete wants to go to the University of Pennsylvania. Now for some context, Pretty Good Pete just finished up his junior year of high school, and he's only now starting to think seriously about colleges. So right off the bat, I'm skeptical because Pretty Good Pete should have been thinking about this in 9th grade. I don't want to go off on a tangent, so we'll leave that for now, and we'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Pretty Good Pete woke up and said, wow, I did pretty good at my SAT. I want to go to a very selective school or maybe even a most selective college. So we're going to assess right now if that's possible for Pretty Good Pete to go to University of Pennsylvania. So as we know, we start above the line, above the screen with the top 3 academic objective criteria. Number 1, GPA. What grades did you get? Well, you can see that Pretty Good Pete has a 3.9 GPA. That's pretty good. It's not great. We all know people out there with 4.5s and 4.6s, but he's not a B student. He's doing pretty well with his grades. Let's move down. SAT. He got a 1410. Wow, that's pretty good. It's not a 1560, but a 1410 is pretty good. In fact, getting the 1410 is what opened up Pretty Good Pete's eyes to looking at some higher tier schools. Let's see if he's going to be able to deliver the goods. Let's move down to his SAT subject test. Right off the bat with math, he got a 730. Okay, I'm feeling it for you, Pete. I'm feeling it for you. Except when we get down to your U.S. history, which is a 610. By itself, not that great. When you average it with the 730, it's dun-da-da, pretty good. So far, so good, living up to your name. Let's move down. How is he doing in his rigor of classes? Well, as you might guess, Pretty Good Pete did not max out on AP classes and honors classes, but he didn't slack off either. He took a mix. He took 2 AP classes sophomore year and 3 AP or honors classes in junior year. And he's planning to take 3 or 4 honors or AP classes in senior year. So overall, that's a pretty rigorous course schedule. So lo and behold, does Pretty Good Pete get through this initial screen? In other words, will a school, a most selective, a highly selective school like University of Pennsylvania, will they even consider Pretty Good Pete based on those numbers? The answer is yes. He has proven to the school that he's worthy of further consideration. Congratulations, Pretty Good Pete. Let's see what else you have going on. We move down. Extracurricular activities, those things that Pretty Good Pete did outside of the classroom. How did he do? Well, he was a lacrosse player, varsity, for 2 years. That's pretty good. It's not a 4-year varsity player, which would be great. It's not a 1-year varsity player. It's pretty typical, so pretty good. Let's move on. The vice president in student government. It's not the president, but it's also not just a member of the student council or a committee. He's getting some engagement and some leadership role. Let's move on. Camp counselor for 3 summers. I like the 3 summers because it shows duration, it shows he's sticking with it, it shows that they're inviting him back, so that sounds like good things, but it also is lacking a little bit of variety and a little bit of diversity. So on balance, pretty good. Let's move on. Spanish club, not really impressed. I don't know if he's actively enrolled in that or whether he just goes and signs his name up and goes to the meeting every other month. I don't really know. Volunteer Meals on Wheels. He actually put in some pretty significant time here thinking that community service and volunteering is going to look good for the colleges. So in some cases it does. It's actually not any better or worse than any of these other things. However, since he put so much time and has a couple hundred hours for that, I'm going to give him a pretty good on that one. He's not running Meals on Wheels. He didn't start that, but he's putting in some pretty good effort. Next, he's a peer counselor. A lot of people are peer counselors. However, it does show that the administration is entrusting him with guiding and mentoring some of the younger kids, the 8th and the 9th graders who are coming up. So that's pretty good. And lastly, a STEM camp at RPI. That was a 1-week camp where he learned about science and technology and engineering. So, in some cases it shows some demonstrated interest. in that field or in that industry. But as an admissions officer, I also know that the parents probably paid for it, and it was probably pretty lush and pretty chill, and he was probably cruising, so it's pretty good. So let's move on from extracurriculars down to awards and honors. As you can see, NHS is National Honor Society. I'm not even sure I'd give that pretty good. I mean, yes, it's good, but for the big schools, National Honor Society usually means that you have a 3.5 and some demonstrated level of community service, depending on what the high school is. So a lot of kids have that. So it's not great, but it's pretty good. Top 20% of the class. Again, he's not blowing me away with that. Valedictorian would be nice. Top 10 in the school. Top 5%, 10%. Top 20% is, once again, you're probably detecting a pattern here. Pretty good. Let's move on. Letters of recommendation. Mr. Ganoush, Pretty Good Pete's guidance counselor. Guess what? He has a pretty good relationship with Mr. Ganoush. He hasn't caused problems. He hasn't had disciplinary issues. He hasn't been a little whining baby about a teacher or a grade. He's gotten good grades. Mr. Ganoush thinks that Pete is a pretty good guy. Next, Mr. Kramer and Mrs. Sardini, math and chemistry. Now, unfortunately, Pretty Good Pete did not get the memo that it's important to think about who's going to write your letters of recommendation in the beginning of junior year, when you have a chance to influence that teacher's opinion of you, so that when they write you a letter of recommendation at the end of junior year, they smash it and they say you're the greatest thing since sliced bread. Unfortunately, Pretty Good Pete wasn't focused on college at that point, so now he's 2 or 3 months removed from junior year. He's now realizing that he needs a letter of recommendation, and he's wondering if Mrs. Sardini and Mrs. Kramer will even remember who he is. And if that's the case, his letter of recommendation will be, wait for it, pretty good. Let's move on. Let's move to demonstrated interest. Demonstrated interest is how much that school feels like you really want to go there. And there's a lot of ways to do that. Unfortunately, once again, Pretty Good Pete missed the memo, and he's trying to scramble at the last minute to follow them on social media. He did attend when the school rep came to his high school. He did attend and put his name on the email list. He has not visited the school. He doesn't have any contacts with the school. He hasn't connected with any professors at the school. He doesn't have any legacy connection with the school. He hasn't gone to camp at the school. So all in all, he's not a 0, but he's not the man either. He's pretty good. Let's move on to essays. My guess, because he's in the middle of writing essays right now, is that those essays will be pretty good. He's a pretty good writer, not a great writer. He has a body of work that is okay, but nothing that's really going to stand out in an essay unless he really does some literary jujitsu. And he hasn't, frankly, been prompted or mentored to think about his life, what he wants to do in college, what he might want to major in. He hasn't really tasted or experimented different things over the summers because he doesn't know what that means. He's just bumbling around trying to get through high school. So unfortunately, I think that's going to lead to having a relatively average or pretty good essay. It's not going to be overly compelling or blow anyone's socks off. And that remains to be seen, but let's just take that for fact right now. And then lastly, hooks. Pretty Good Pete does not have any hooks. Hooks are things, I'm not going to dwell on them now. Those are things like if your parents went to the college, if you're a recruited athlete, if you come from an economically deprived area. None of those things apply to Pretty Good Pete. So, as I assess Pretty Good Pete's body of work, does Pretty Good Pete stand a chance to get into University of Pennsylvania? Well, drum roll, please. Audio guy, drum roll. Don't have an audio guy. All right, the bottom line is Pretty Good Pete stands a pretty good chance of not getting in to University of Pennsylvania. Why? Because those most selective schools have the license and the freedom to pick the great Petes of the world, the great Pamelas of the world. And unfortunately, for probably a number of factors, Pretty Good Pete is just not making the mark. Now, that's not a guarantee. Maybe he'll get in, but in my assessment, Pretty Good Pete does not have what it takes. Now, before we go crazy, this does not mean that Pretty Good Pete is a bad guy. This does not mean that Pretty Good Pete is not going to find a good fit college for him. This does not mean that if he doesn't go to UPENN, all is lost. This does not mean that Pretty Good Pete is not going to be a success in his life. Completely irrelevant. What matters here is that I like to give people like Pretty Good Pete a chance to be great Pete. I like to give kids like Pretty Good Pamela in 9th grade a chance, a fighting chance, to be great Pamela. That's it. That's all I ask, is that they have a fighting chance. They know what's ahead of them. They know the steps. They know the extracurriculars, what they might want to do over the summer, what other kids are doing. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to do it. It's still a small percentage of kids who actually execute the plan. That's okay. I don't mind that. That's on them. That's on their family. Maybe they want to be Pretty Good Pete. Fine with me. I just want them to know what is possible. So if you know anybody in your life, son, daughter, nephew, friend, whatever it might be, who's in 8th grade, who's in 9th grade, who's in 10th grade, boy or girl, Pete or Pamela, who is on the path to being pretty good, and you think they might have an inkling of wanting to be great, please contact me. Let me know. I will send you a PDF of this. You can walk them through these steps. This comes with a glossary that explains each one of these categories. Give them a chance in 9th grade, at the latest 10th grade, so that they can fulfill their potential. See you on the next one.